Oh, hi there, friends. Mandy here. Restorative grief is all about creating easy access to healing no matter where or who you are. That's why I want you to remember that if you want grief support beyond a podcast, my 31-day guidebook is available to order on Amazon. Embracing our losses without losing ourselves is a reflective journey into the holistic needs of grievers and learning to support yourself, mind, heart, body, and spirit. Don't just wing it. You can lean into grief work with a guide. The link for the book and more are available in the show notes, and as always, you can reach out with questions. But for now, let's get on to this week's episode. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 174, titled Healing Beyond Good and Bad. What does it mean to unlearn something? In a world that tends to define everything in opposites, good or bad, right or wrong, unlearning can feel like the most difficult task. But when we understand that the brain is not static but malleable, it becomes more clear that unlearning isn't just possible, it's essential for healing and growth. Research shows that the brain is always growing, changing, and evolving, constantly working to create safety and process new information, including the painful and the uncomfortable memories we carry. When our brain stores a memory, it does so without emotion. It simply retains the information that is necessary for survival. It is our autonomic nervous system, or ANS, which operates automatically to protect us with that information and that's constantly evaluating the safety of our environment. So when it detects danger, it moves us into a sympathetic state to act quickly, often bypassing complex emotional processing. This survival mechanism can be a double-edged sword, especially in grief, though. Helpful when physical threats are present, but unhelpful when we are constantly on guard, assuming the people and the spaces around us are not safe. So you can see how unlearning is really important to our grief process because the truth is we're not always in immediate danger. However, unlearning what the brain has been conditioned to see as necessary for survival can be incredibly difficult. As grievers, this automatic survival mode can hold us in patterns that no longer serve us. We've been taught to view grief as something bad to avoid, and yet grief is a natural response to loss. It is a necessary part of our healing process and our humanity. But this binary thinking of good versus bad limits our ability to fully engage with our grief. We need to challenge this duality, moving from simplistic labels into a spectrum that acknowledges the complexity of grief as a necessary part of healing. Mary Frances O'Connor, in her book, The Grieving Brain, writes, quote, "Grief is not just about the emotional pain we feel. It is a process by which the brain is trying to make sense of a world in which the person we loved is no longer present." This aligns with the idea that grief is not just an emotional experience, it is a neurological one. The brain struggles to accept loss and adapt to a world without the person we loved, and that struggle is part of the unlearning process. Because nothing is static, but if we exist within a binary of believing and thinking of here or not here, our grief work can become sticky and challenging to navigate. So by dismantling the binary view of grief as something bad or undesirable versus a good existence that's not including grief, we can open the door to a deeper understanding of how grief works in the brain and in our lives. In this process of unlearning, we begin to see grief as something on a spectrum rather than the binary of good or bad. This shift is essential to grieving well. And what does it mean to grieve well? The answer to this question really depends on you, on what your grief journey looks like, what you want it to look like, and how you have learned to navigate it. This is where the principle of openness from restorative grief really comes into play. Openness is about allowing yourself to sit with the grief, to acknowledge its presence without judgment, and to give yourself permission to experience it without trying to fit it into predefined categories. Grieving well, for me, has meant saying no to many things. It means disappointing others when necessary and rejecting societal norms that demand I suppress my grief for the sake of productivity or appearing just fine. The process of grieving well is an individual thing, and it requires a redefinition of wellness that cannot and does not conform to cultural or societal expectations. As I've shared before, my grief work includes developing a plan for self-care during depressive episodes and honoring my wellness through practices that might not fit the typical mold of people wanting me to move on or get over it. This unlearning process extends beyond our personal grief. It includes a collective aspect as we grieve the oppression and the suffering of others. For me, grieving the oppression of LGBTQ+ communities in the U.S. is part of my own work. Grieving the systems of conformity, of medical gaslighting, and spiritual bypassing that limit true healing and growth. And as I do this work, I recognize that my grief and healing is connected to the collective grief and healing of everyone around me. This shared grief experience calls for openness to new possibilities of connection, safety, and belonging. And the rigidity of that dichotomous good or bad needs to be unlearned, because in unlearning it, we are freed to see grief as a healthy part of the human experience and of the collective experience. It becomes something that moves us toward wellness together rather than away from it. When we view grief as part of the larger spectrum of experience in this life, we can start to embrace the messiness, the complexity, and the unpredictability of grief without fear or shame. The key to this openness is understanding that our grief work does not happen in a vacuum. It is happening as a part of a larger collective healing process every single day that includes our own growth and healing work in the communities around us, whether we are directly involved in that work or not. Ultimately, the work of unlearning the moral codes and societal expectations that shape how we grieve is about trusting ourselves and others to create new structures that do not rely on a binary that doesn't serve us, but structures that support wellness, growth, and healing on a spectrum for everyone. It's about recognizing that good is not the standard anymore. Expansiveness is. In embracing the full spectrum of grief and grief experiences, we create space for healthy, supportive, authentic ways to grieve that allow for growth, transformation, and healing. And that is the point of grief work. Thank you for listening to episode 174 of Restorative Grief. I hope this essay has offered you a new lens through which to view your grief and the potential you have for unlearning the limiting ideas you've been taught about it. And if you're feeling resistance to this idea, I would invite you to pick up a journal and write through that resistance. Express your frustration, your doubts, and your hopes, because grief is hard, but it's also a pathway to healing that is expansive and full of possibility, if you're willing to look for it. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast, share an episode like this one with a friend, and help me out by talking about this work with people you know. And if you want even more support for your grief work, remember you can always become a patron and gain access to weekly workbooks that walk you through each episode more intentionally as well. And you can learn about joining the Restorative Grief Project, hosted privately over on Facebook. And before we go, as always, please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.